Dragon Ball needs to die. I think that's a new record. Only one sentence in and it starts with an inflammatory statement that I'll probably regret. But oh well. Sometimes you have to take a risk. Do you know what a risk is, Toy? I say that with a pretty heavy heart though, because in the end, it didn't have to be this way. It's a series that I've been a fan of for almost 2 decades now. From its early, heavily censored English dub, to seeing the original Japanese version and realizing we'd all been lied to. After seeing Dragon Ball Super's first 26 episodes though, it's convinced me even more that Dr. Jack Kevorkian was both a saint and a scholar, because he of all people knew that it was just cruel to keep a corpse alive. The ideas put into this project were so ill-conceived that it's comparable to pitching an idea for a children's cartoon show, which features a toddler with progeria who never makes it to their 5th birthday. Oh, that's right. They actually did have a show like that. It was called Ill-Conceived. The truth of the matter though is that the series had been on a downward spiral for years before this show came along. Number 1. The Road to Hifil. For the purpose of this episode, I'm going to mostly be referring to Dragon Ball Z, less so the original Dragon Ball series, and not GT at all. Though I guess the most damning thing I can say now is after seeing Dragon Ball Super, I have a new appreciation for GT. There were a number of different points where the story was supposed to end in Dragon Ball, according to the series creator Akira Toriyama himself. If we're going by personal preference, I think it would have ended best at the Saiyan saga. Keep the Dragon Balls gone, let Krillin get the killing blow for a change, keep all the people who died actually dead, and end on a bittersweet victory where father and son are reunited and the Earth is safe. But then again, I'm not in marketing or merchandising, so, you know. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the Frieza saga, of course. I actually loved it. It was here where tensions were high, our heroes were vastly outgunned by enemies on all fronts, and things were probably at their bleakest. After this story arc came to an end though, with all the glorious violence, children and old people being killed on screen, limbs being torn from their sockets, the Ginyu Force, Vegeta's character arc coming full circle, and the confrontation between Goku and Frieza, well, let's just say it was a very long way down from the top. The Cell Saga, while not necessarily bad, introduced us to more Super Saiyans, a questionable time travel plot, higher levels of Super Saiyans, a new set of Dragon Balls with less strict rules, Cell transforming from an awesome bug monster to a boring man with white makeup, and countless illogical decisions made by the characters that led to disaster every single time. Granted, there were some very good things about this saga, quite a few of them in fact. One of the best, in my opinion, was that it ended with a good sense of closure, even if it doesn't make a great deal of sense that Goku would choose to stay dead. Maybe they should have just not made more Dragon Balls so that he didn't have a choice, and it would have been a harsh reality they would have had to face. It would have made more sense dramatically, and Goku would look way less like a selfish asshole. Then came the Majin Buu saga, or as I call it, the beginning of the end. I could probably go on for hours about why this saga's existence alone annoys me, but I'll let these images speak for themselves. It didn't help that this was the longest saga with the least compelling villain, and filled to the brim with false climaxes, even more new Dragon Balls to negate the threat of death, and other stupid shit I hate. Still, even this arc had some things I enjoyed, like when it was over. And Vegeta, I guess. Seeing him give Goku the thumbs up after Buu is finally killed, and throwing his pride away for the good of the world and his family, that was a great way to put a cap on their rivalry and the series as a whole. Not to mention, pretty much every scene with Mr. Satan, as always, was wonderful. Man, I miss Daisuke Gori. Credit where credit is due, the Buu saga seemed to have a much more consistent quality as far as art and animation was concerned. The Frieza saga and especially the Cell saga had some issues, let's say. After the Buu saga ended, not counting GT, we didn't get anything until the TV special Yo! Son Goku and His Friends Return in 2008. That's exactly one boyhood later. This special featured Vegeta's never once mentioned before younger brother Tarble, because Toriyama only has 5 character designs, and worthless villains that pose no threat to anybody. I didn't much care for it if you couldn't tell already. In 2013, that same tone was continued in Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods. The difference here, however, was that Beerus was an interesting antagonist that was unlike anything we'd seen in the series yet. While he was a literal god of destruction, he was unpredictable, had a bit of a sense of humor, and wasn't necessarily evil. So the lighter tone kinda worked here. It lacked the tension and brutality of something like the Saiyan and Frieza sagas, needless to say. But as a standalone movie, I thought it was a lot of fun, even if some things in it made me shake my head at how stupid they were, even by Dragon Ball standards. Then in 2015, we had another movie, Dragon Ball Z Resurrection F. This one featured Frieza, who shouldn't have been a threat even to the 7-year-old at this point. But don't worry, he trained for 4 whole months, so I guess that makes it understandable. While Battle of Gods felt fresh, Resurrection F reeked of desperation, having to resort to bringing back the best villain the series had, but kind of forgetting what made him good to begin with. More on that later. Given how this was just a movie, and with most of the Dragon Ball Z movies being about as far from canon as possible, this was an acceptable, mindless side story at least. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, in 2011 there was an OVA called Episode of Bardock. We don't talk about Episode of Bardock. It had been quite some time since I last watched Dragon Ball Z to its completion, probably at least 10 years now. So when I heard Dragon Ball Super was announced, I kind of forgot what direction the series had taken over the years, and was initially excited to see it. So much so that I hopped on the bandwagon and made my own Episode 1 review, but did it in a much more sarcastic, asshole-ish way, and then proceeded to make fun of how nothing important happened. Oh man, if only I knew what was coming next. Number 2. Yeah, you got that right. I really don't like to make statements like these, but Dragon Ball Super is what I'd like to refer to as utter shit. Surprisingly, a lot of people share that sentiment, but a good deal of them do so for entirely different reasons. Maybe they can't quite put their finger on what's missing from this show, or they just have different opinions than mine. There's nothing wrong with that. What I think most people can agree on though is that the art and the animation in Dragon Ball Super is atrocious. For such a big name series like Dragon Ball, nobody could have looked at this and said in good conscience, yeah, that's fine. Fucking Galo Sengen looked better than this. Comparing Dragon Ball Super to the 2015 Lupin the Third series, which is specifically designed to look old-fashioned, Super looks archaic and cheap. Even without the extreme examples that the internet started rallying against as early as the 5th episode, there are some scenes like this that are just so incredibly flat and lifeless. And it's even worse when you look back on what Dragon Ball's animation used to look like 27 years ago and realize we've regressed. It's true that Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z weren't without their own quirks in the art or animation, of course, but it also wasn't consistently ugly and robotic as often as Super is. There are times when the animation is fine, good even, but they're so overshadowed by the shoddy production values in the worst scenes that it's easy to forget. And the worst part about all this, I think this is the least of Dragon Ball Super's problems. Number 3. Everything new is old again. Before we continue, I'd like to address King Kai and how his voice actor Joji Yanami sounds when delivering lines.
お前もいい親父なんだから挨拶ぐらいきちんとしろバカモン
There's energy on screen, but we hear none of it through his voice. There's a lot you can make fun of, but the sad reality is that the man is 84 years old, he's obviously tired, and he had to take an indefinite medical leave from the series from episode 12 and on. Mr. Yanami has been part of Dragon Ball's animated rendition from the very beginning, as Dr. Briefs, as King Kai, and most importantly as the narrator. Every single episode we've heard his voice in some capacity. I'm not callous enough to think that it's Toei's fault for Mr. Yanami's medical issues, but this information makes me even more certain that Dragon Ball Super just shouldn't have been made. For all intents and purposes, Mr. Yanami is just as much representative of Dragon Ball as Masako Nozawa, and I can only hope his health issues are resolved, and that he doesn't feel obligated or, God forbid, pressured to return unless he absolutely wants to. With that out of the way, let's get back to talking about why I hate this show. Everything in Dragon Ball Super so far is just more of what we've already seen. No, literally. It's nothing more than a retelling of both the Battle of Gods and the Resurrection F movies, the latter of which were released the same year and was already kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of ideas. It's true that Dragon Ball has always had pacing problems, mostly in in Z. Fights can sometimes drag out way too long, and there are some very slow scenes, but for the most part it was engaging and probably taught some kids the value of patience, not to mention appreciating silence and ambiance. After Dragon Ball Kai abridged the series to a more reasonable pace, it's baffling to see Dragon Ball Super stretching an 85-minute movie over the course of 14 episodes, and then doing it again right after. The correct approach, of course, would be to not rehash movies that just came out and make some new stories, but hey, I guess that requires effort. Just put any shit out there with Goku on it, people eat it right up. But it's not all exactly the same, of course. There are some ever so slight differences. For example, in the movie, Bulma's birthday party was in the city. Here, it's on a boat. Oh, but I guess we get some hilarious new kid peel-off scenes, don't we? There's also no shortage of eye-rollingly desperate scenes made to cash in on nostalgia. Hey, remember that part in Dragon Ball Z when Piccolo sacrificed himself to save Gohan? Remember how important that scene was and what serious implications his death carried for the entire cast and the story as we knew it? Remember how it showed how much Piccolo had changed as a character along with Gohan? Well, guess what? He does it again in Super, but it has absolutely no impact on anything at all. Gohan's an adult at this point, so it just kinda makes him look more pathetic. Piccolo's life is no longer linked to the Dragon Balls, so him dying doesn't really have as much meaning as it once did. And on that note, you know they're just gonna bring him back to life again anyway, because the series has established that precedent time and time and time again. Speaking of precedents, number 4, a victim of its own design. Jumping the shark is a term I don't really like using, but it can accurately describe several points in Dragon Ball over the years. From power levels, to Super Saiyans, to the inevitable power creep that every new villain needs to be stronger to the point where this happens. Dragon Ball really should have just quit while it was ahead. As much as I personally disliked this descent into absurdity that Dragon Ball fell into as it progressed, there were at least several precedents that were set in the process that were hard to dismiss. With such a gap in power levels, there was a more clear logic that the show had gained in regards to certain characters and where they stood in terms of their capabilities. I think that's a very unfortunate way to write a series because it renders entire groups of characters completely null and void, but the damage had already been done. There was no going back after that, so for better or for worse, the audience had to adapt to that because there was no other choice, other than to stop watching, of course, which would be a good idea at this point. This all starts to fall apart in Resurrection F, and by extension Dragon Ball Super, but not in a way that makes any of the less useful characters actually relevant again, just the opposite in fact. When Frieza was killed in Z, he was a non-issue to the point where Trunks didn't even have to try. After each new villain that followed Frieza was seemingly exponentially more powerful, the idea that he trained for 4 months and was able to surpass all of them that much flies in the face of any established logic, implied or not, that the series had. I can already hear people say, but of course they had to have him be stronger. There wouldn't be a movie or a rehashed story arc otherwise. I have a couple responses to that. The first response is that yes, that would be preferable. My second response is that if you absolutely need to bring Frieza back, have Goku and all the other strong characters off doing something away from Earth, and just have the weaker ones left there to fight him. Maybe Krillin, who I'm assuming would probably be close to Frieza's level at this point. Now go ahead, leave your comments. Krillin's power level would only be 600,000 or whatever. Congratulations! We're both proving the exact same point. Frieza also lost any menace he once carried too, both from the fact that we know that one of several sets of Dragon Balls could just bring back everybody he kills to life, and from the way his character behaves. In Z, Frieza didn't actually show his power for a while, so we were left to wonder just how dangerous he really was. All of his underlings feared him and obeyed his orders without question after all. He was usually calm and collected, but still capable of cruelty at a moment's notice. Helped by a fun cast of supporting henchmen like Dodoria, Zarbon, and the Ginyu Force, Frieza is considered by some to be the best, most despicable villain in the series. A great thing about his rivalry with Goku was that Frieza didn't know him at all, nor did the two even see one another until right before their fight began. Frieza couldn't care less who this guy was, nor did he even consider him a threat. He was just another Saiyan monkey to crush under his heel. Seeing Frieza gradually lose his composure, going from an arrogant, confident space dictator to a screaming, unhinged lunatic with no regard for his own safety, was fun to watch, because we saw how much it pushed him from his usual dignified self. In Resurrection F and in Super, there's none of that build-up at all, nor would that build-up even help, because ultimately we've seen this shit already. Instead, Frieza is at some awkward halfway point, where he's just clearly there for revenge and hamming it up, but not at all intimidating, even if he is overpowered again. It just comes across as pandering at best, and a total lack of understanding the source material at worst. Number 5. No danger, no point. One of the things that I loved about Dragon Ball was that as it went on, it got progressively more serious. I enjoyed the early, more comedic adventures, don't get me wrong, but it was interesting to see a series grow up a little bit with its own audience. To give you an idea, let's compare two minor villains and see how they're dealt with as the series went on, shall we? Tonin Jinka, or Monster Carrot from an early episode of Dragon Ball, is defeated by Goku, who uses his Nyoibo to send him to the moon, and then leaves him there. Zarbon from the Frieza saga has Vegeta punch him so hard that he impales his stomach, leaving a giant bleeding wound, then proceeds to blast him at point blank, penetrating through his back and undoubtedly vaporizing several internal organs. The resulting blast sends him flying into a nearby lake to die from either shock, bleeding out, or drowning in his last fucking horrible, agonizing moments of life. Ever since the Frieza saga, Dragon Ball has steadily grown more sanitized over the years, with the amount of violence being lowered to the point where we're at Dragon Ball Super now, without so much as a drop of blood. I'm not saying that violence or gore makes something better or more mature on its own. I mean, it clearly doesn't. But it's an element that can add some weight to a dire situation by showing some more dire consequences. I can live without Dragon Ball Super showing blood, fine. But what I find utterly unforgivable is the show's lack of any sense of danger, or mood for that matter. Part of that can be attributed to the musical score itself. I'm gonna ruffle some feathers here, I'm sure. But to me, the Shunsuke Kikuchi score has always reigned supreme as far as establishing Dragon Ball's mood.
Oh, what is this, some 50 shit?
Is usually the criticism it gets, to which I say, fine. You're entitled to your opinion. To be fair, there were some times where it wasn't utilized properly, but for the most part there was such a wide variety of songs, from emotional to mysterious, and most relevant in this case, complete and utter dread. That's something that's been missing from Kenji Yamamoto's score in Kai, and continues with Norihito Sumitomo's score for Super. It's not that Sumitomo is a bad composer, but the songs played during battle don't give the impression that our heroes are in any danger at all. I guess it's not really his fault though, given how the two major enemies so far, Beerus and Frieza, aren't really effective in this series. To clarify, I like Beerus. He and Whis are probably the best part about this series, but even then, the joke of cat loves food begins to wear thin after a while. Along with the humor depleting, the threat of his powers wane even faster. He says he's gonna blow up the Earth approximately 10 times and doesn't do it, even when Oolong loses the rock paper scissors game against him. Oh, and we also know he doesn't do it because he doesn't do it in Battle of Gods. When Frieza comes back, Beerus' presence actually makes the lack of tension even worse. He and Whis are just sitting there, watching the fight casually, looking bored and unamused, sorta like the audience. Yeah, I know they give some throwaway line that the fight with Frieza is just trivial to them, and they just choose not to get involved. Whis probably just sees this as a training exercise for Goku and Vegeta, really. But it renders the entire thing extremely safe and boring, doesn't it? The only reason Beerus and Whis don't help is because if they did, the fight would be over in an instant and there would be no Resurrection F arc. Sounds fine to me. All the minor characters seem to be there on the sidelines to act as further window dressing, to ruin Krillin and Gohan's images, and to act as gasp dispensers while Goku handles everything like usual. All those reaction shots and observations sure help pad that runtime though. Oh yeah, and let's not forget that Frieza succeeds in blowing up the Earth along with everybody on it. They even make a point in Dragon Ball Super to make it seem more horrifying by showing characters like Videl and Bulma's parents' last moments. But don't worry, Whis can reverse time 3 minutes back to let Goku have a chance of killing Frieza before he does it. Because it was such an unexpected move for Frieza to try to destroy a planet that Whis couldn't have seen it coming. Oh, wait a minute. Even without all of this, though, there's still the biggest factor in the entire series that utterly ruins any tension if you stop to think about it for a few seconds. Ironically enough, it's the show's very namesake, the Dragon Balls. What were once elusive and mysterious relics that took a fair bit of time to actually track down, the Dragon Balls became a glorified get-out-of-jail-free card that was used repeatedly to correct any problems the characters may have run into, namely people dying. In Dragon Ball Super's defense, this was a problem that started long ago in the series, so I'm hardly singling this one out. It's kind of a unique problem for a piece of fiction when a character dying or the Earth being blown up is just an inconvenience. They've had the Dragon Balls disappear and make things tense again in the past, but they always ruin it shortly thereafter when a new set of Dragon Balls is discovered or just invented. Yet they still felt the need to say when Frieza blew up the Earth, "Oh no, the Dragon Balls are gone." Let's not forget Goku's ability to travel anywhere with his stupid instant transmission ability. It was even proven he could travel to the afterlife while he was still alive. So what's stopping him from going to New Namek to use their Dragon Balls if the ones on Earth are gone? He could have gone there to wish the Earth back now that the Namek Dragon Balls had their wish power upgraded in the Buu saga. Ah, fuck it, you get the point. Number 6. Character development. You can't see my hands right now, but I'm making air quotes. There's one thing I've seen some people saying when acting as an apologist for this train wreck of bad ideas. Oh, I mean TV show. They claim that when people criticize completely nonsensical actions from the characters, we aren't true fans for not bending to this show's terrible writing. One scene in particular with Krillin surrounded by Frieza's soldiers made me hate this series exponentially. Seriously, this one part alone may have been what pushed me to make this whole episode. Here we see Krillin intimidated by these thugs who are probably 1/1000th of his strength. Even Roshi is beating these guys, but here we have Krillin frozen in fear and unwilling to fight. His allies even tell him to run away. Aside from this being a complete mockery of his character, I've noticed some people defending this scene, citing it as an example of character development. But I'd like to counter that argument right now. 1. Krillin has died 3 times already, and he's well aware that they have Dragon Balls to bring people back to life, and he knows there's an afterlife, so I think he'd just be used to it at this point. 2. Krillin has plenty of weakness already. Adding another flaw on top of everything else starts to just take away from his character rather than add to it. 3. Krillin was a strong character because of his tenacity and reliability, regardless of how outclassed he was. He got scared at times, sure, sometimes even willing to let children and the elderly be massacred in front of him, but he wouldn't shy away from even the strongest opponents. There's even a theory floating around saying that Krillin being scared of Frieza's soldiers was him showing symptoms of PTSD from his death on Namek. Whoa. If we're going to start factoring real serious medical issues into Dragon Ball, the entire cast would be a complete wreck. Gohan probably would have all kinds of physical impairments due to the intense physical trauma he experienced between the ages of 4 and 5, not to mention all the emotional scarring. Master Roshi would have little to no cognitive functions left, given that he's more than 300 years old. Just because he can't die of old age doesn't mean his brain cells can't. The point I'm trying to make is that real medical issues like that don't really make sense in a story that has a magic bean that can instantly repair fatal injuries, like having your neck broken. The weird thing about this scene with Krillin was that it didn't happen at all in the Resurrection F movie, nor did the scene with Piccolo dying for no reason. It was just sloppy writing and a terrible attempt at characterization that ignores everything that happened in the series up to that point, in hopes that we will too. I'd like to think that most fans of this series are smarter than that. Speaking of bad characterization, I hate what they did with Vegeta in Super. After swallowing his pride and getting over his obsession with being stronger than Goku at the end of Z, here he is, back to his old ways again. He even wears his Saiyan armor because that's what people recognize. This is treading water in the worst of ways, because this rivalry has already been done to death, and it's actively regressing Vegeta as a character, but I guess we shouldn't worry about that. By the time they go against the new original villains Molecule and Majin Buu, Vegeta will probably come to the realization that he doesn't care about surpassing Goku. Again. Oh, and I like how they've whittled Vidal's character down from a street-fighting, rough-around-the-edges girl who Gohan was teaching how to fight, to a boring and obedient housewife, completely drained of her personality and with a worse design. Seriously, fuck this show. Number 7. Who is this show even for? This may be the most baffling, mysterious aspect of Dragon Ball Super in general, its intended demographic. I sincerely doubt it was made for fans like me, who appreciated both the lighthearted tone of earlier Dragon Ball and the high-stakes, violence-laden extravaganza that was the first 2 sagas in Z. That sense of progression is something I loved about the franchise, and as it eventually started to devolve into sanitized, childish trite that doesn't even attempt to get the crude early Dragon Ball humor down, well, I guess I started to care less for it. I'm not really certain that Dragon Ball Super was aimed at a new generation of young audiences either, though. If you were to sit a kid down in front of this show, they'd probably just be confused, overwhelmed, and ultimately would rather watch something else. If they had any previous knowledge of older, better Dragon Ball, they'd probably ask something along the lines of, "Hey, why does this show suck so much?" Kids don't want to watch forced slice-of-life postcard moments like Trunks and Goten gathering spring water for Vidal's wedding gift. They don't want to watch toothless fight scenes with no consequences, and I don't think they're really going to laugh too hard at Beerus liking food after seeing it for the 57th time. Contrary to what some people think, kids can handle some fantasy violence and adult themes. Hell, I watched Ninja Scroll when I was 10 years old. I think I turned out just fine. In an age where you can literally bring up a browser and watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Osamatsu-san, Lupin the Third, Kaiji, Gurren Lagann, GTO, Kill la Kill, and countless older shows, legally and for free might I add. No kid who gives half a shit about anime is gonna bother with Dragon Ball Super, and the thought of this show being a gateway anime like Dragon Ball once was is just laughable. So who was Dragon Ball Super actually aimed at? It'd be easy just to say what we're probably all thinking here. Blind fanboys with disposable income. The type who will buy anything with a product's name on it, regardless of whether or not it has any substance. The type who puts their hands over their ears when they hear criticism of the show they enjoy, and starts yelling at people that they're wrong. The type who will remain in some kind of Stockholm Syndrome-style trance, saying that Dragon Ball Super is saving its animation budget and original ideas for the Universe 6 arc or whatever the fuck it's called. The type who claim that if you dislike this show, or God forbid some aspects of Z, you're not a real fan. The type who puts Akira Toriyama on some kind of pedestal as if he's the funniest and most creative man alive who can do no wrong. The type who are so dishonest with themselves and to others that they claim that they're hyped for seeing the next episode of this garbage, despite already knowing what's going to happen. It'd be easy to say all of that, but I won't. I can only come to the conclusion that this show is intended for nobody, in the hope that brand recognition would carry it all the way to the bank. The sad thing is, it's probably right to an extent. Dragon Ball has never been what I'd consider to be a masterpiece. The characters aren't deep, the animation has never been stunning or even consistent, and the stories aren't complex. Not to mention, the idea of a series having a single fight between 2 characters lasting 18 episodes is about as insane as inviting John Wayne Gacy to entertain at your 4-year-old's birthday. I mean, Gacy's dead, he just kinda sit there doing nothing, so, you know. But it's a series that, despite all of its flaws, has captivated audiences around the world for more than 30 years. Even after a long love-hate relationship with the series, and looking at it with such a critical lens, I still consider myself a fan, although I find this new show to be... yeah. As with any franchise this expansive, you can take the good and leave the bad. While I may be in a minority when I say the series should have ended with a Saiyan saga and kept the Dragon Balls gone and most of the characters dead in my depressing headcanon ending, that's just my opinion. I just hope that now you can see where I'm coming from. So was there anything about Dragon Ball Super that I liked? Well, I thought some of the character interactions were okay. Hearing Gohan referring to Mr. Satan as dad was kinda touching, honestly. They didn't seem to make a big deal of it, so it just kinda felt natural. Also, the scene where Mr. Satan gave up all of his prize money to Goku's family was good too. Mr. Satan was already a pretty stand-up guy by the time Z was over, so this just really solidifies how much of a selfless character he became. So, what I'm saying is most of the scenes with Mr. Satan, really. Also, Dragon Ball Super's opening theme was done by Kazuya Tatsuya Yoshi, frontman of the Japanese rock band The Yellow Monkey. As a fan of said band, that was actually a real treat for me. Chozette's dynamic is certainly no Chala Head Chala, but it's not bad. I like the first ending theme too, not only because it signified that the show was over, but because it's a good song in its own right. Show 'em, Mr. Lopez.